The shuttle doors opened with a hiss, releasing a wave of heat that immediately swept through the cabin. The cadets, fresh from the climate-controlled atmosphere of the Galactic Interplanetary Academy's cruiser, winced as the raw, blistering temperature of Kareth punched them in the face. The planet's notorious triple suns hung oppressively in the purple-tinted sky, casting jagged shadows across the arid terrain. Heat shimmered across the cracked surface, and waves of distortion rose from the scorched earth in rhythmic pulses. As the group stepped out one by one, the air clung to their skin like molten glue. Boots crunched against baked stone, and beads of sweat formed instantly on those whose protective suits were not yet sealed. Maya Reeves blinked against the brightness, her pupils adjusting slowly as her helmet's adaptive lens engaged. She tightened the straps on her utility harness and stepped down the ramp, taking her place among the line of cadets with an unreadable expression. Her hand gripped a long, flat metallic case, which looked oddly out of place beside the sleek, streamlined survival kits of the others. To her left stood Zorvin, a tall cadet from the amphibious species of Delther Prime. His blue skin was already beginning to dry and crack under the punishing sun, despite the moisture-preserving gel lining his uniform. To her right, a twin-skulled Vextrian named Hilrax adjusted the collar of his cooling cape, muttering something in his native tongue about primitive planets and pointless training rituals. Each cadet represented a different race, a different world, and all of them had been sent here for the same reason: to prove their endurance under the most hostile natural environment permitted by the Galactic Training Authority. Kareth was chosen because of its unstable temperature fluctuations and high solar exposure. It was not a planet one casually visited. It was a test of raw survival, stripped of comforts and luxuries, and the first lesson came as soon as the shuttle lifted off and left them behind. The only communication devices allowed were non-digital. No energy shields, no teleportation, no drones. Only what they could carry, improvise, or build. The instructor, a sour-tempered Zunari named Commander Gruul, walked up and down the line, his transparent eyes scanning each cadet's equipment. He stopped when he reached Maya, his voice flat and disapproving. "What's in the steel case, human?" Maya's jaw tightened as she straightened up. "A mirror, sir." The cadets within earshot burst into laughter. Even Gruul's reptilian mouth twitched at the corners. "A mirror? This is no spa retreat. Are you planning to do your makeup in the desert?" Zorvin chuckled loudly. Maybe she wants to see herself burn slowly. Another cadet, a blue-eyed Yalixan with gliding membranes instead of arms, added, "Perhaps she plans to charm the sun into giving her mercy." Maya didn't flinch. She kept her eyes on the horizon, her voice even. "It's for utility, sir. A non-digital tool that reflects and concentrates light. It doesn't draw power. It doesn't break under radiation. It functions regardless of weather or solar interference. It's old Earth tech. I believe it qualifies." Commander Gruul grunted, clearly bored, and moved on. The mockery continued behind her as she carried the bulky case toward the designated base area, while others activated their retractable shelters with magnetic clamps and deployed slick thermal fabric structures in shades of green and silver. Maya walked out toward a rocky ridge just outside the main staging zone. Her boots crunched over the darkened crust of volcanic glass, her breathing steady and measured. She scanned the terrain for a place that was both elevated and partially shaded. After a few minutes of climbing, she found it, a wedge between two boulders, narrow but sheltered on one side from direct sunlight. There, she set the mirror's frame into the ground, angling the wide reflective surface toward the open flatland below. With practiced care, she tightened the frame's braces, locked the angles, and brushed dust off the mirrored side. It gleamed like a sliver of starlight against the brown-orange rock. Even from a distance, it caught the eye, a polished, unnatural surface reflecting the triple sun glare with intensity. Down below, cadets watched her through squinted eyes and shaded visors. Zorvin elbowed Hilrax. "She's setting up a tanning salon," Hilrax hissed in amusement. "Wait till the mirror melts. Let's hope she doesn't blind herself before day 2. Maya said nothing. She unpacked the rest of her kit in silence, arranging her few items in tidy order. Water purification tablets, a multi-tool with non-electronic parts, a thick thermal tarp, and a booklet on heliograph signaling from the early 20th century. Everything she carried was analog, rugged, and thoroughly tested for high-heat survival. It was old school, outdated by galactic standards, and completely laughable to those raised on nanotech and plasma generators. But Maya knew better. She had studied Karith's solar data. She had seen what happened to synthetic fabrics under solar flares. She had read survivor accounts where cooling tech failed, and those who made it through relied on principles older than spaceflight. Even so, she felt the sting of ridicule. She was used to being underestimated. The only human in a class of aliens, always expected to lag behind or collapse first. But Maya didn't seek validation. She wasn't here to impress anyone. She was here to survive. As night began to fall, if it could be called that, given Karith's minimal drop in temperature and the red glow of its smallest sun, cadets gathered at the shared eating zone, a circle of collapsible crates with nutrient packs and water rations. Zorvin glanced toward her mirror, now covered with a reflective tarp, and smirked. "Still planning to signal passing ships with your shiny toy?" Maya looked up from her water ration, her expression calm. "If needed." Hilrax snorted. "You do realize we're surrounded by jagged mountains, unstable magnetic fields, and solar interference. Good luck reflecting your way out of this one." Maya didn't answer. She took another sip of water and focused on the horizon. As darkness settled over the rocks, most cadets returned to their smart tents, folding themselves into padded chambers with built-in coolers. Maya lay beneath her tarp, the mirror beside her wrapped securely in insulation cloth. She stared at the sky, her mind already running simulations. She calculated angles, memorized sun positions, and traced shadows with her eyes. She was waiting for the moment when mockery would no longer matter, when knowledge, preparation, and human stubbornness would be the only thing keeping them all alive. And it would come sooner than any of them expected. The second sun had barely risen above the jagged ridge when the first malfunction occurred. Hilrax had just activated the thermoregulator in his breathing helmet when the interface flickered and let out a high-pitched hiss. He yanked the helmet off, his twin skulls sweating profusely, one voice cursing while the other muttered in disbelief. The device blinked red before shutting down completely. He stared at it in his clawed hands, confused and growing increasingly agitated. Commander Gruel's voice crackled over the analog loudspeaker staked into the ground near the supply zone. "Log your gear failures. No replacements. Adapt and continue." The announcement sent a chill through the group, figuratively, as there was no actual cold to feel. The atmosphere had only grown more punishing. The second sun, larger and closer than the others, intensified the heat by mid-morning. The air shimmered more aggressively. The dark ground beneath their feet absorbed and radiated the thermal energy until standing still felt like baking inside an oven lined with metal. Maya sat under the partial shade of her boulder perch, her posture relaxed but alert. The reflective surface of her mirror, unwrapped and repositioned, stood angled beside her, casting a sharp beam of light toward the ground below. With subtle movements, she rotated the base, bouncing a line of sunlight across the temporary shelter trench she had dug. The angle kept the zone lit while reducing direct sun exposure, creating a controlled environment. The trench wasn't deep, but combined with the mirror's reflection, it allowed a balance of visibility and partial shade. She had positioned it just right the evening before, using stars for orientation and calculating solar trajectories from the planet's geological charts. It wasn't advanced tech, it was geometry. Below, several cadets were beginning to look more uncomfortable. Zorvin, who had spent much of the morning lounging on a flat rock near his folded glider canopy, shifted restlessly. His moistening gel was gone, evaporated by the unrelenting heat. His exposed blue skin had turned a dull gray at the edges, and his neck was streaked with thin cracks that oozed translucent fluid. He tapped frantically on the side of his exosuit, trying to recalibrate the internal climate unit, but the interface kept flashing error codes. He cursed under his breath, then stumbled toward the central supply crate to retrieve a backup coolant pack, only to find the box sealed. "Locked?" he growled, turning to Hilrax. "These are emergency conditions." Hilrax, still holding his dead helmet, shook his upper skull slowly. "Protocol says first 72 hours must be endured on initial gear. Commander Gruel made it very clear. It's part of the trial." Zorvin cursed again and dropped to a crouch, using his clawed fingers to dig a shallow groove in the dirt for shade. He didn't have Maya's mirror or her foresight. His species was water-dependent, engineered for oceanic environments. Kareth's punishing heat was more than just uncomfortable. It was lethal. As the suns climbed higher, cadet after cadet experienced gradual system failures. The solar deflectors on the Yalixan's membrane suit began to melt at the seams. His gliding flaps, meant to stretch over tents for shade, sagged uselessly. A Vrok-born student from the ice fields of the Sarathi Belt had brought a climate-adaptive pod that now lay overheated and smoking behind a jagged stone outcrop. Her eyes, adapted to low-light conditions, were bloodshot from the brutal exposure. By noon, a few cadets had gathered in the remaining shadow of the main supply crate, panting and groaning. They leaned against its sides, trying to cool themselves, but the crate had absorbed too much radiation and offered no real relief. Maya observed quietly from her ridge. Her water ration, carefully shaded in a pouch wrapped in reflective foil, remained cool enough to sip without burning her lips. The mirror, now tilted slightly higher, projected a wide arc of redirected light toward the emergency flagpole, illuminating a shaded crevice where she had seen movement earlier. Some kind of burrowing creature. If it was alive in this heat, it meant the spot maintained enough internal insulation. A good place to consider relocating to, if needed. She pulled her notepad from her belt, the pages coated in weather-resistant polymer, and jotted down coordinates, notes, and wind behavior. Her mind remained in constant calculation, estimating when the third sun would peak, how long her current angle of reflection would remain effective, and whether the slope of the ridge behind her could funnel cooler air downward during the next planetary rotation. Hilrax squinted upward, using his hands to shield his sensitive eyes. He spotted the gleaming mirror and narrowed both sets of eyelids. "She's playing with light like it's a toy," he grumbled, his throat raw. "What good is that thing, really?" "She hasn't complained once," said Zorvin weakly, now lying flat on the rock, his lips dry and cracked. "And she's not cooking like the rest of us." Hilrax shook his head in irritation, dragging his overheated gear toward a half-collapsed tent. The cooling core had exploded hours earlier, leaving only torn insulation fabric and the smell of fried circuitry. He tossed the remains aside and crawled beneath the flap. The shadows helped slightly, but not enough. By late afternoon, the cadets' bodies began to show signs of serious heat fatigue, skin blotches, irregular breathing, dizziness, and impaired focus. Several of them, especially those from cold-adapted planets, struggled to keep their heads upright. A Sarnian male, whose blood was copper-based, collapsed outright and had to be dragged to the center by two others. Commander Gruel observed from a distance, unmoved. Maya stayed on the ridge. She turned her mirror again, this time angling the beam across the edge of the encampment, signaling the location of the Sarnian cadet. The flash of light caught Gruel's attention. The commander looked up sharply, then followed the beam's arc to the collapsed student. He barked something into his wrist unit, summoning a medical drone, not to treat, but to log vitals and record whether disqualification was warranted. Some cadets began to inch toward Maya's position by dusk. Too weak to care about pride or appearances, they didn't speak. They just sat quietly at the edge of the reflective shadow she had created, letting the shielded zone offer them a few degrees of mercy. Maya neither welcomed nor pushed them away. She adjusted the mirror's tilt, creating a wider beam. She handed one cadet a pouch of insulating cloth and pointed to the cooler rock layer beneath the soil. She didn't explain. She didn't lecture. She acted. As night fell and the worst of the heat began to wane, the stars emerged, faint behind the swirling dust in the upper atmosphere. The third sun dipped below the horizon, casting deep crimson across the canyon walls. Maya sat silently near her mirror, listening to the shallow breathing of the cadets around her. Her own muscles ached, but her core temperature remained stable. She flipped open her notepad once more and wrote a final entry for the day. Day 2. Primary prediction confirmed. Equipment failures in high UV zones within 30 hours. Mirror performance exceeds expectations. Group survival rate already declining. Psychological shift visible. Mockery fading. Practical observation replacing arrogance. She closed the notebook, leaned back against the warm stone, and exhaled slowly. Her hands were sore, her vision blurred from exhaustion. But she was still standing, and unlike the others, she hadn't needed to complain, break down, or beg for mercy. She had brought a mirror. They had brought arrogance. Tomorrow would be worse. She would be ready. The night passed in oppressive silence, broken only by the ragged breathing of dehydrated cadets scattered around the rocky slope near Maya's mirrored refuge. The air remained hot long after the third sun had vanished, and only in the final hours before dawn did the temperature drop to a bearable level. Maya stirred from her curled position beneath the insulated tarp and sat upright, her muscles stiff but functional. She scanned the camp below. Most cadets were either asleep or slumped in various degrees of exhaustion. No one had fully recovered. She unwrapped her mirror carefully, brushing a thin layer of dust from the surface. The light from the moons was enough to let her recalibrate the angles by eye. She repositioned the frame slightly, anticipating the first strike of sunlight that would rise over the jagged hill to the east. Her fingers moved with practiced efficiency, and her mind, though tired, remained sharp. She did not expect the others to last another full day under Kareth's triple solar flare schedule, especially not after what her notebook had predicted. An hour later, the sky blushed with that sickly orange hue that signaled the return of the primary sun. Maya stood at the mirror's edge, watching the slow crawl of daylight as it bled across the barren landscape like a warning. She fastened her scarf over her mouth and nose, tied her sleeves tighter, and checked her water ration, still sufficient for one more day, if used with precision. She did not sip yet. She waited. Then came the rumble. It was distant at first, a low, tremulous vibration that echoed through the ground like a buried engine waking from centuries of sleep. At first, she thought it might be local tectonic activity, but the seismic pattern was wrong. It was irregular. It was pulsing. The others stirred at the same moment. Zorvin lifted his head, his face drawn and coated in white crystal residue from dried sweat. He looked around slowly, blinking in confusion. Maya stepped to the edge of her perch and narrowed her eyes at the horizon. She spotted the source immediately. Thick streaks of red were forming across the sky. Not clouds. Plasma. The atmosphere was reacting. A solar storm, worse than she had anticipated. Before she could shout a warning, the ground trembled again, this time stronger. A blast of static charged the air, and the loudspeaker staked at the center of the camp sparked once before exploding into a puff of smoke. Several cadets jumped up in panic. Hilrax fell to his knees, clutching his heads as the static feedback rippled through his dual nervous system. Across the flatland, every powered structure flickered, hissed, and then failed entirely. The impact hit like a punch from the heavens. A pulse of solar radiation surged through the planet's upper layers, cascading down in a visible sheet of golden energy. The tents disintegrated, cooling fabrics evaporated. Any cadet standing without cover was thrown back by the concussive heat wave that followed. The third sun, still below the horizon, had sent its flare directly through the atmosphere, amplified by the unstable electromagnetic field. It was the kind of phenomenon the instructors claimed was extremely rare. But Maya had seen the numbers. She had suspected this might happen. She just didn't know when. Screams followed. Panic. A Vrauk girl cried out as her leg covering caught fire and she rolled down a slope, trying to extinguish the flames. Zorvin dragged himself behind a boulder, his eyes wide with terror. Several cadets tried to activate wrist consoles or med scanners, but nothing worked. The pulse had fried all digital interfaces. Maya remained standing. Her mirror had caught part of the flare, but the polished surface redirected most of it at an upward angle. A blinding reflection flared out from her position, scattering sunlight in all directions like a weaponized flare. For a moment, the cadets looked up and saw only that light, piercing, dazzling, and controlled. She didn't waste time. She crouched beside the mirror and adjusted the angle again. Her fingers trembled slightly from the residual heat in the metal, but she held firm. Using the broad face of the mirror, she cast an arcing line of reflected sunlight into a crevice that had not been touched by the storm. Then she moved to the edge of the slope and shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Move to the shadow, toward the light arc! Follow the line." Some cadets, stunned and disoriented, didn't react, but a few saw the motion of her beam across the ground and crawled toward it. Zorvin dragged another cadet behind him, gasping for breath as he reached the base of the slope. Maya didn't stop. She repositioned the mirror again, this time flashing short, sharp bursts toward the upper cliffs. The rhythm was deliberate. It was an emergency heliograph code, an old Earth distress pattern designed to be picked up by visual scanners, not digital frequencies. Commander Gruel was nowhere in sight. Hilrax stumbled forward, his face pale, one skull bleeding from the left ear. He collapsed halfway up the slope, his arms shaking. Maya rushed down and grabbed his wrist. She didn't speak. She just hauled him slowly up to the edge of the mirror's coverage. The shadow zone she had created was now the only cool zone left in the area. The mirror's angle deflected enough of the solar radiation to keep the zone habitable, not comfortable, but survivable. By mid-morning, more cadets had reached her position. They sat in silence, clutching each other, their suits burned, their tech useless. The only thing that protected them now was the wide shield of redirected light and the ancient calculations of a girl who had once studied primitive survival strategies in an academy where most saw it as irrelevant trivia. Maya wiped sweat from her brow and returned to the mirror. She adjusted the tilt again, making the light dance upward in precise intervals. Her eyes were locked on the sky, scanning for movement. The drones would come. Not because of the Academy's mercy, but because the heliograph signal she had sent was designed to be picked up by visual tracking systems. Old tech, long range, passive. The kind of signal that didn't need power, just intention. The cadets behind her remained silent. Their mocking had long since died. The ones who could still move were applying water paste to the burns of others. No one asked Maya how she had known. No one questioned the mirror anymore. As the third sun climbed, its light no longer came with death, not for those under her protection. She kept adjusting the beam, fingers blistering against the hot metal, sweat pouring down her face. She didn't care. She would keep them alive. And the sky, now partially cleared, began to respond. A faint glimmer of silver appeared at the horizon, a drone's reflective surface catching her mirror's call. Help was coming. But survival had already begun. The glint in the sky sharpened into a recognizable silhouette, triangular wings, narrow core, stabilizers flaring with pale plasma trails. The drone was on approach, flying low and deliberately slow to avoid triggering dust vortices common during Kareth's late-morning thermal shifts. Maya kept her eyes fixed on the object, her hand steady on the mirror's frame. Her heartbeat, though heavy from exhaustion, quickened with calculation rather than relief. One drone wasn't enough for evacuation. It was a scout. She repositioned the mirror again, this time narrowing the beam into a steady vertical pulse. If the drone's AI still followed standard search and signal protocol, it would recognize the rhythm of the emergency light and descend for biometric assessment. That was her best chance at getting attention focused on the cadets, not just the flare data. A low whine filled the air as the drone reached optimal scanning altitude. It hovered above the camp, rotating slowly. A narrow blue cone of light descended from its core, sweeping methodically over the area. Some cadets flinched under the sudden glow, but Maya motioned with her hand, urging them to remain still. The scanner needed time to lock onto life signatures and determine the severity of the environmental breach. As the beam passed over her, the drone paused. The cone narrowed, intensifying briefly over her position. Then, a chirping tone confirmed the biometric lock. Maya took 2 steps back, shielding her eyes. A hatch hissed open underneath the drone's belly, and a small silver cylinder dropped into the sand. It hissed, deployed 4 legs, and started to unfold a thermal canopy. It wasn't large, barely enough to cover a dozen individuals, but it was a start. A pressurized cooling field activated around it with a low hum. The air immediately grew denser, and the temperature within the ring dropped by several degrees. Zorvin dragged himself toward it first, carrying a pale, unconscious cadet with him. His hands shook as he placed the cadet inside the ring and collapsed beside her. Maya didn't follow. She remained at the edge of the slope, her mirror still tilted at an angle, catching the sun and bouncing it in steady, intentional motions. Hilrax stepped up beside her. His gait was uneven, his eyes bloodshot, but he had enough strength to speak now. The drone scanned your signal first. It knew who to prioritize. His voice was dry, but not sarcastic. Maya didn't answer immediately. She checked the reflection spread, calculating how much longer the current angle would be effective. Then she exhaled slowly and said, "It followed the light, not the rank, not the tech, just the pattern. That's how simple truth works." Hilrax nodded once, quietly. He turned and helped another cadet walk down toward the cooling ring. Another 10 minutes passed. The drone hovered, observing. Then it launched a second cylinder, this one larger and heavier. It landed near the base of the ridge with a solid thud, then split open, revealing a reinforced canopy, 3 water tanks, and a medical scanner pod. As the cadets gathered around it, the field commander's voice boomed from the drone's vocal relay system. "This is Field Scout 879. Solar flare anomaly confirmed. All digital systems compromised. Emergency shelter deployed. Await further instructions. Do not leave the scanned perimeter." Maya turned her attention to the new supplies. The cadets had already begun distributing water and triaging the worst injuries. No one was shouting. No one was arguing. The earlier arrogance, the dismissiveness, gone. In its place, a quiet, humbling efficiency shaped by the edge of survival. She left the mirror standing and descended the slope to refill her canteen. She paused beside Zorvin, who sat with his back against a tank, his face buried in his hands. "Did you signal them?" he asked, without looking up. She crouched next to him, poured a bit of water into a cloth, and handed it to him. "I gave them something to see," she replied. He wiped his face and nodded. "I didn't think... none of us thought..." "You didn't have to," she said simply. "You weren't taught to." He looked up now. His voice broke slightly. "Where did you even learn this stuff?" She sat down beside him, eyes scanning the fractured skyline. "Earth has deserts too. Not like this, but hot enough to kill you if you're proud." A few meters away, Hilrax was helping the Sarnian cadet into the medical pod, guiding his limp arms gently. The drone adjusted the pod's temperature and began cycling diagnostics. No one needed to tell it what had happened. The damage was obvious. Radiation burns, fluid loss, overheating-induced trauma. The pod beeped and injected stabilizing compounds. Maya stood and walked back up to the ridge. She grabbed a set of spare reflective sheets from her pack and laid them across a wider angle of the boulders, increasing the mirrored spread of light. Even now, with drones hovering and partial relief available, she wasn't done. The environment had not changed. The sun still ruled Kerith with merciless fire. This wasn't over. One of the younger cadets approached her, Yarin, a quiet boy from the gas moons of Delka. His eyes were swollen from the heat, but he clutched her signaling booklet in his trembling hands. "I saw you use this," he said. "You made the drone come." She nodded. "I gave it the oldest signal in the book." He hesitated, then asked, "Can you teach me how to do that?" Maya studied him for a moment. Then she crouched down beside him and opened the booklet, pointing to the first pattern. "This one means danger. It's the most basic. If you ever need help and you don't have anything digital, you use light. That's all you need." He listened, wide-eyed, while she explained the intervals. 1 flash, pause, 2 flashes, pause, long beam. He repeated the rhythm with his fingers. The 4th sun never rose on Kerith. There was no such thing, but the metaphor lingered in the cadets' minds that day, as if something had dawned among them regardless of the planetary mechanics. It was not about the sun. It was about understanding. By late afternoon, a secondary drone convoy arrived with Commander Gruul aboard. His armor was scorched at the edges, but he stood tall. He scanned the scene in silence before walking to the center. His voice, when it came, was low but firm. "The data confirms it. The only functioning emergency signal came from this location, using non-digital reflection. The cadet responsible will be noted for commendation." No one clapped. There was no need. The acknowledgement was weighty on its own. Gruul turned to Maya. "Do you have a name for the maneuver?" She looked him in the eye. "Reflection vector signaling, Earth standard, pre-digital field training." He nodded once and walked away. As the evening sun cast long shadows, the cadets sat quietly around the canopy, drinking slowly and nursing wounds. The wind had shifted slightly, carrying dust along the ridge. Maya covered the mirror and tied it down. It had done its job. But the lesson it cast would last far longer than its shine. The final day on Kerith began not with blinding heat or howling static, but with an eerie calm that unnerved those who had endured the trial's worst. The air remained thick, unmoving. The sky held the same jagged gold hue, and the distant mountains seemed to vibrate gently under the sun's first presence. But something had shifted, not in the climate, but in the cadets themselves. Maya sat on a flattened slab of stone, her mirror now folded, cleaned, and tucked into its carrying frame. It had cooled completely overnight, and she had used part of the morning to polish the surface until it gleamed like a calm lake under starlight. Around her, the others prepared for extraction. The drones had established a perimeter beacon during the night, and Commander Gruel had confirmed pickup at solar midpoint. There would be no further trials, no additional endurance segments. The flare had sealed the final grade. Most cadets remained quiet as they moved through their tasks. Some rolled up damaged gear with shaking hands. Others checked on recovering classmates with subdued attentiveness. The arrogance that had marked their arrival was nowhere to be found. In its place, respect earned the hard way, not only for the planet, but for survival itself, and for the cadet who had outlasted them all without a single powered device. Hilrax approached Maya carrying 2 packs, one on each shoulder, his gait steadier than the day before. He set one pack beside her, sat without a word, and stared at the horizon. He didn't speak for a long time, and she didn't fill the silence. Eventually, he reached into his coat and pulled out a compact recorder with a broken screen. He turned it in his hands once before letting it fall into the sand beside him. "I always thought I'd be one of the strongest here," he said at last, voice flat. "I've trained on fire planets. I've run volcanic tunnels. I've lived through vacuum simulations. But none of that made me ready for this." Maya glanced sideways at him but said nothing. He continued, eyes forward. "When I saw you carry that mirror, I thought it was pathetic. Like you didn't understand the gravity of the challenge. But you understood more than I ever could." She brushed a line of dust from the surface of her case. "I didn't come here to be stronger than anyone. I came here to be alive at the end." Hilrax nodded. "And you made sure we were too," Zorvin called from the base of the ridge. The drones had returned, and their extraction skiffs were descending in vertical formation, each trailing a column of cool steam to neutralize the surrounding heat. One cadet ran to help flag down the lead skiff, while another helped the medical pod up the ramp. Maya rose and fastened the case to her back. The mirror clicked securely into place behind her shoulders, gleaming as the sun caught its edges. She descended slowly, taking the same path she had memorized on the first night, the tight slope between the 2 largest boulders, then the sharp turn left to avoid the shattered obsidian patch that could slice through standard boots. No one followed her immediately. When she reached the base, she turned and saw the others watching her. Some carried the injured, some dragged broken tents and scorched tools. But all moved with silent unity, following her path as if it had always been marked. The skiffs hovered low, the central one opening its ramp with a sharp hiss. Commander Gruel stood at the top, arms behind his back, helmet under one arm. His eyes scanned the procession as each cadet climbed aboard. He said nothing until Maya reached him. "You disobeyed nothing," he said. "But you changed everything." She met his gaze without flinching. "I did what worked. You brought legacy tools to a future trial. They functioned." Gruel's eyes narrowed. "The Academy does not teach heliographing anymore." "It should," she said. He studied her for a long moment. Then he stepped aside and motioned for her to enter. "Your report will be used in the next training module. Full credit, tactical commendation, field innovation." She nodded and walked aboard. Inside, the temperature was stabilized. Cooling vents lined the floor and padded seating curved around the bay. Cadets filled the cabin in silence, bruised, burned, but alert. The quiet wasn't fatigue, it was transformation. Those who once scoffed now sat with shoulders straight, watching Maya as if trying to learn from posture alone. As the ramp closed, the pilot's voice came over the comm. "Leaving Kareth orbit in 3 minutes. Next stop, Academy Station 9. Hilrax leaned forward from his seat, looking toward Maya. "What will you do with the mirror now?" She removed it from her back, propped it beside her, and ran a finger along the edge. Her eyes didn't leave it. "I'll carry it again," she said, "wherever they send me next." Zorvin, seated across from her, spoke for the first time in hours. "Even if we're not assigned together, you'll always be the one who showed me that survival isn't power, it's intention." She looked at him. Intention guided by preparation. He nodded solemnly. As the skiff rose into the sky, leaving behind the scorched earth of Kareth, A final reflection from the mirror bounced off the interior hull, casting a streak of soft light across the cabin wall. The cadets watched it move, not with curiosity, but with understanding. In the Academy records, the trial would be marked as an environmental hazard override, mission compromised by an uncontrollable solar event. But among those who lived through it, the truth would pass not through lectures or data reports, but through story. The story of a mirror, of an old signal, of a quiet human girl who never raised her voice, but altered the course of future training with nothing more than light. And when the next generation asked what real strength looked like, someone would point toward the corner of a skiff and whisper, "She brought a mirror to survive a sun." And she did.